So, good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock, so it's about time to start, and we're going to go straight to the point here. This is the discussion about the Machinery Directive and the Machinery Ordinance, um, and the complications arising in a transition between the two. First, I'm going to just say that there's a distinct difference in the way those two are set up uh, legislatively. Machinery ordinance means that the local government does not have the option to change the ordinance to a local directive, like with the machinery directive we have today. So let's see. Thank you to everybody for coming, by the way. Um, this is my first webinar, so please have a little bit of a patience with me. I'm new to this stuff, and I'm also new within Onix. Only been with the Onix for the past 2 months. I've been in the oil and gas industry since about 2006 until now, and in various positions and various job functions. And very happy to be with Onix now in helping out in achieving better conformity to our laws and standards and regulations. And let's see, without further ado, let's do the power presentation I have prepared for you. Let's see here. There we go. So, machinery ordinance. Machinery ordinance was first decided upon in 2023, and as a standard, the EU has a 3-year wait period or grace period, if you want, for legislations or nations around the EU to conform to this and make proper preparations. This means that also all companies needs to be in compliance with this within the date of effectivity, or yeah, and the date set upon the nations is January 1st, but the date set upon companies within EU is January 14th. But then there's a hard cutoff, and the new ordinance is in effect from January 14th. And there is no wiggle room in between. And I say EU because that's where the ordinance comes from, but it is in full effect within all the European economic zone, which Norway just happens to be a part of. So, what is it, and when does it take effect? We're going to go through coming changes, what it means for us all, and then a question session at the end here. So, first of all, most of the machinery directive is already in compliance with the new ordinance. There's slight changes to the wording in the new ordinance and a couple of additions, and mainly the additions to the ordinance is in regards to AI, self-learning AI and AI systems. And most other things are more or less like what it is today, but with a certain small nuances that is coming, that's going to be making a little bit of an impact across Europe. So who does it apply to? It applies to any company within the EEA. That's the European Economic Association, all the economic zone of the European economic zone. And as I was touching on here, it's a correction and expansion of the currently in effect regulation that exists. A lot of countries have their own regulations in effect currently, and this is EU's try to get everybody to work on these, to read from the same page, so to speak. So it's going to be easier to handle work across country borders, and also shipments and work equipment. And as I touched on, it's going to come into effect for the countries themselves on January 1st, but it's going to come into full effect for the companies within those countries on January 14th. So, what changes and for whom? And the ordinance touches three links in the chain, and it's the manufacturer, distributor, and end user. And by distributor, uh, we mean anybody that sells equipment for money, not the ones giving it away. Distributor is one that sells and has an economic incentive for the transfer of goods. So, existing in the current legislation, we have a setup where the manufacturer is required to present documentation as a user manual, declaration of conformity, and inspection certificate, load test certificate, use maintenance manuals, and all the likes. And it just says that the manufacturer need to produce it, but it doesn't say anything specified about what needs to happen after the point of production. Suppliers have no hard-pressed obligations onto the quality of the documentation. And also, there is a slight wording in the current legislation that says only in effects to please forward to your customers whatever documentation you get from the manufacturer. Whereas the change here is that the suppliers now in 2027 will have an absolute prohibition against selling equipment which does not have a complete documentation package in compliance with the regulation. So if you are selling something like a chain block, for example, or yeah, a chain block, then if it doesn't come from the manufacturer with user manual, a test certificate, and a declaration of conformity, then it is illegal for you to sell it to a client. And also, it says now in more harsher terms that you need to supply this documentation to the end client, and everything else is a violation of the law. So it's a much harder restriction on the supplier side of things. Um, and also, employers must make documentation available. This is currently, at least in Norway, made into effect by the Workers Act, paragraph 3 or 4, I believe, which says that every single worker has the right to a safe and secure work situation. And by that effect, they have the right to seek information about what makes their days safe. And by that, the user manual is the thing that supplies this information. Um, and also, employees must have access to information. This is the case today, and it only pertains to user manuals and original certification and documentation from the manufacturer. The change to this is that employees now shall have access to all documentation. This means, amongst other things, that the users of the equipment must get immediate access to test certificates, for example, from the annual inspections being done to the equipment. Like if you have inspection companies on site and inspecting your cranes, your lifting equipment, your firefighting equipment and such, those test certificates need to be immediately made accessible to the user. And by immediately, well, within reasonable time, I would say. So a digital system for handling all documentation here is very vital for this immediate effect. So manufacturer specific requirements. Before we had, well, currently actually, in 2026, we have this standard legislation that says that all equipment needs to be labeled with manufacturer name, type, model, weight class, and so forth. And as you see here, the user manual declaration conformity is required in physical paper form. And yeah, I forgot to write this up here, but it also pertains to the test certificates. And the documentation must accompany the product from the manufacturer out to the end user. But the changes to this now is that the labeling on the product itself is extended upon. It now needs to also contain the address to the manufacturer, and preferably, if size permits, must also have a digital link to the manufacturer's homepage or the documentation portal. Physical documentations can still be included in the shipping of the document, but is no longer required. What has changed here is that the new legislation says that it can be shipped in either paper format or digital format. This pertains to the QR code, RFID, and NFC systems that have been implemented in more and more systems today, like lifting straps, for example, from Certex is a very nice example of that, which has digital chips in them, which you can read out and get access to all information, like all the documentation to it, and life cycle log. And the big change here is the declaration of conformity. That must be available in digital format. That's the prime requirement. Anything else can be only on paper, but the declaration of conformity must be digital. But it can also be supplied in paper format, but that's an addition to the digital one, not a replacement for it. And also, documentation must be kept on file for the product's full lifetime by the manufacturer, or 10 years, whichever ends at the latest. And product lifetime, currently the legislation only handles equipment history from manufacture date until end of service. And the new regulation now extends upon this and also requires us to handle the full lifetime of the equipment. That means the dismantling, destruction, and the full end of life scope. So it's not enough now to say that, okay, we just throw away the lifting strap when we're done with it. You need to follow through. Yeah, and unchanged is on discovery of defects. Usually when we discover faults on products that lead to major instances of harm to people or environment or such, we need to report this back to the manufacturer in order to assess whether more clients of theirs have gotten their hands on the same equipment, whether or not this equipment might lead to more accidents. And having a digital system will assist with this. Any questions so far? Just feel free to put it in chat, and if I can't answer it on the spot, I'll get back to you later. So, importer and distributor. Distributor today is the entity that last conveys a product to an end user. An importer is not the one that imports something directly into a country. It's someone who imports something into the EU. This means that if a company in Germany uh, gets a hold, try to sell something that they've gotten a hold of from Italy, they are not an importer. They are only a distributor or reseller. An importer is one that takes equipment from outside of the EU into the EU. And when that happens, they also assume full responsibility on the same level as a manufacturer. This means that you have responsibility to make the documentation in a proper format, proper language, and also apply to all European laws and regulations. So the distributor must verify product comply with European law before sale. Yeah, that means by European law, we mean the new machinery regulation and the norms that the product is produced according to. And as formally discussed here, it is illegal for a distributor or importer to forward equipment that does not have a complete documentation package. That is a big change here. It's illegal to sell equipment that does not have complete documentation package. And this requirement is now the responsibility of the importer to the EU or the manufacturer. This is a specific text in Article 15-3 in the Machinery Regulation that governs this specific requirement. Where a distributor considers or has reason to believe that the machinery or related product is not in conformity with this regulation, the distributor shall not make it available on the market until it has been brought into conformity. And by distributor considers or has reason to believe that machinery, this only means that if you deal in this type of equipment on a regular basis, then you have no way to get by this. You should know your business, and you should take documentation into consideration. So no longer can an importer to the EU say that, well, it's produced in China, so we don't know. So for the end client and the user, let's see. There's no direct change to the end user's obligations, but it's a strengthening of their rights. So the digital requirements to the Declaration of Conformity is one part, but it also with a digital system basically implied as the best practice by EU. There's an easier way of handling documentation all the way from manufacturer to the end user. Currently, we have most documentation coming in paper format. There's a lot of different systems out there, and it's easier just to send the documentation in paper format instead of doing it digitally and having end users with maybe 10, 20, 30 suppliers requiring that user to have 10, 20, 30 logins to various different systems. And digitization is mainly today handled by the end user with scanning the documents, either putting it on in a dedicated scanner or using the phone app for this and putting this documentation into their own system. There's also a frequent problem of missing documentation like user manuals, parts lists, maintenance manuals, declaration of conformity, and all this stuff. And the consequence of this, the most critical consequence of this is that you have the government coming in doing inspections on site and saying that you're not in compliance, we need to shut you down until you're compliant again. This is, of course, extreme cases, but it can happen if you have very high security levels on your site. And the question in chat here is, does documentation need to be in local language, or can this be universal English? Yes and no. So if you are a reseller in a specific country, then you need to deliver documentation, all documentation in that country's own language. And if you deliver, let's say you are a supplier of pipes, and one day one of your clients comes to you and tells you that, well, can you get this cable drum for me? This is not within your normal scope of gear to have in stock. So you order up this cable drum, sell to the client, but the documentation is in English. This is a unique situation, is not within your normal scope. The documentation can be in English in this case, but if it's in your normal scope, it should be in a local language. Then we come to the end user. The equipment owner need to make sure that all the documentation is in a language that the end user understands. This is not a supplier requirement. This is not a manufacturer requirement. This is a equipment owner requirement. So if I, for example, sit here in Norway as equipment owner. I have a crane. I have special ordered this crane. All the documentation is in English. Then I'm going to use the Italians as an example here. Get an Italian crane driver. He doesn't speak a word Norwegian, doesn't speak a word English. Then it's my responsibility as an equipment owner to make sure that I translate the user manual and the other documentations to Italian so that he can understand it. The complication here is that this is going to be a costed equipment owner, and the alternative is get a different crane driver. Simple as that. The documentation must be understood by the end user. And yeah, responsibility for requiring missing documentation can be transferred back to the retailer. What I mean by this is that when you do not receive the documentation you're entitled to as an equipment owner, it's easier for the equipment owner to push back on the supplier and says that you have not supplied me with the legal amount of documentation. So either I get full rights to a hefty reduction in price, or we return the equipment and go with a different supplier. And also, we don't have to do the digitization anymore ourselves. We can push this cost back to the supplier. And also, in turn, the supplier can push this cost back to the manufacturer. So it's a price savings change in the regulation. So a document ecosystem end to end. What I mean by this is that currently the regulation that is coming into effect in 2027 says that the declaration of conformity shall be in digital format, but can in addition be in paper format. And this serves as hint, so to speak, of a digital future where everything should be digital. And but the EU has admitted to that having a hard cutoff from paper format to digital format is a brutal thing. Not everybody in Europe has a very good internet with a good connection, and so we need to have a grace period where everything can be also supplied in paper format and not put a full requirement on digital format across all documentation. So what's changing primarily for us when this regulation comes into effect? Well, usually up till now, we had all documentation being handled at end user level. By end user, I mean equipment owner. I did a little investigation into this a year ago, and I figured out that about 95% of documentation on the end user level is missing. And I'm not saying that 95% of the equipment is missing information. I'm saying that 95% of the documentation is missing. That means, for example, that a lifting strap having a declaration of conformity and a certificate, and those two are usually the same document for a lifting strap, by the way, but is missing the user manual. That is a lack of documentation. And also the other way around, we have equipment having user manual but missing a certificate or a declaration of conformity. And yeah, it's about 95% of all equipment have this lack. And that is not within a specific industry, that is across the board. Much of the time, equipment arrives at the end user without documentation, or the end user has systems in place where a field technician or a remote worker goes directly to a store and picks up an equipment and puts it in their car, takes the equipment out of the box, and the documentation stays in the box get lost, documentation is lost, and then you have equipment without documentation. And also you have suboptimal storage and incorrect use, um, which which does affect lifespan of the equipment. And it's hard to keep track of proper use and proper storage when you don't know what proper is. And that's usually described in the user manual, which is for the most part missing. And the EU now will require a digital document system in the future. That is not coming in, this requirement is not coming now in 2027, but it's implied by the requirement of having the digital declaration of conformity. And also we have a digital link on all equipment that is required. And this is wherever placement and size allow. Of course, if you have a small 1-ton shackle, this does not allow for very many QR codes or RFIDs to be placed. That's one of the major pain points of smaller type equipment. So therefore, this exception exists. And missing documentation will no longer be a problem in, for example, Onix. It's a supplier non-conformity issue. You can push this requirement back to your suppliers or manufacturers to fix your stuff. So where does Onix fit into this whole ecosystem? Well, Onix is a system that can handle the whole documentation transference from manufacturer to end user. It allows for a system where you can register QR codes to each and every single item that is produced, and so that the end user can just scan this QR code and get instant information about the condition of the equipment. You have one solid digital database where all documentation is stored. And if the manufacturer stores this digitally with a QR code or similar on the equipment, then the supplier has everything in order by default. There's no longer any obligation or extra work necessary by the supplier in order to be in compliance with the regulations. And it makes the end users work much easier in the fact that all documentation is sorted into one ecosystem with one login, one lookup, and uh, and yeah, you will be able to monitor the equipment for the whole life cycle from birth to death. And let's see, Nexus ERP. We are currently using Nexus ERP, which generates reports and certificates. Will it be the obligation of the developer to allow translation, or will that be up to the equipment owner to do the translation of the generated reports? Uh, Reports and certificates, normally it should be in the recipient's language, normally. But as said, there are exceptions to the rule. For example, you can't have, I'm going to use it seems like I have something against the Italians here, but if you have an Italian inspector doing a job on a German site, the Italian doesn't speak a word German, how can you then expect the Italian to serve a certificate in German? The inspector needs to verify the conformity of the inspection report. So it needs to be in a language they both understand. So English in this case is very much okay. And also, if you have any inspection or similar in where the inspector is from one company, one country, and the customer is from another, a common language will be preferred because both the sender and the recipient needs to be able to do a conformity check of the documentation made. And then it's the recipient's responsibility to translate that if needed. So this is one of those exceptions that allows for other languages. So I didn't have much more than that. I was done in 30 minutes instead of 45, so that's a good thing. And So what we can dive a little bit further into is that most of the recommendations and requirements surrounding documentation is pretty straightforward, really. We have we have the Workers Act in most European countries are set up in such a way that uh, the workers' safety is the core issue that we need to handle and look up to, and that's why we need to have the documentation in order so they can look up the information and be sure that what we're actually doing is safe. Many customers or many equipment owners now say that, okay, we have a course that covers this and that requirement. Like, um, let's say that a customer says that, well, every single one of our workers have a license to operate this product. That does not say that the equipment owners does not have the obligation to also serve those same operators with a user manual. You can study, for example, driving a forklift, for example. You can be as certified as you want at driving the forklift and having 1,000 hours of courses in driving forklifts. If you do not have the user manual for that specific forklift, then you're not in compliance. And this is something that is overlooked on a very wide scale. So, question about the part where you mentioned that the supplier is responsible for ensuring that all parts comply to the new regulation. In case we need to provide chain or wire rope sling with specific client-owned parts to fit into their installation, can we still use such part? Example, client has hook we need to reuse, but has lost their certificate. Info about the hook can be found. So now, so we know the specs, but can't provide certificate for that part. Well, when combining multiple parts into setup like that, like a chain sling or such, you will do the tests after the fact, and you will supply a certificate for the whole setup, right? So the certificate will not be for a single component; it will be for the test of the completed product, and you are responsible for the end product. And but if the legislation says that each and every single component needs to have a certificate, then you need to abide by that. And it depends on your internal practices, I would say. But you need to specifically test it after the fact in order to provide a test certificate with your stamp on it. And that will take over the responsibilities of each and every single component, if that answers your question. And also, there was a question that was asked on the last gathering we had in Onix. What if you're producing a batch of products? Let's say you have 1,000 products in a batch that you're going to produce, and you produce 500 of them in December, and you produce 500 in January. Does the whole batch or 1,000 needs to be in conformity with the new regulation, or only those produced in January? And the answer is only those in January needs to be in accordance with the regulation. But abruptly stopping production of a batch just to change the conformity level of the production is a silly idea, and it will slow down production, and it will mess up your documentation systems, seeing as you have the same batch number for 1,000 items, but 500 of them have a different regulation requirement. I would highly uh, advise you to have every single item in that batch in accordance with the new regulation. Um, This is actually a very good question. Is Onix planning to develop a standardized form that enables manufacturers to issue a declaration of conformity for assembled components produced and supplied, for example, a wire sling? I do not know currently, but that is an excellent idea. I'm going to take that up with development, and we're going to look into that immediately. That is a very good question, and it should be in already, in my opinion. So, so we need to have a means to register each and every single component within the declaration and within a certificate. So yeah, it's an extremely good question. Any other questions that you have on your chest? I do not know this. The ATAX directive, I haven't looked into that possible complication here, but yeah, I'm going to have to look into that. The Machinery Directive, the only big changes there is the AI part of it. There's some smaller changes to how the wording around documentation is laid out in order to produce more definitive responsibility on each and every single link in the lifecycle chain. And the only big addition is the AI side of things, where it now contains a large portion of regulations surrounding how to operate within an AI environment with self-learning and all that. And there shouldn't be any complications up towards the ATEX directive, as I know of anyway. But I'm going to have to look further into that. But yeah. New question, risk assessment on product need to be informed as part of documentation or just result on residual risk? I'm not sure I understand this question fully, but on risk assessment is from 2027, 100% requirement from the manufacturer or importer. And risk assessment will be easier after 2027 because of this requirement. Um, and this risk needs to take into consideration any form of elevated risk uh, from using the equipment. But I'm very unsure if this risk matrix is something that has to be supplied from the manufacturer to the end client. It only says that it has to be made available to regulatory insights. Like for example, in Norway, it's Arbeidstilsynet. If they contact a manufacturer of some sort and says that we need to see a risk matrix on this product, then manufacturer is obligated to produce this. So, any other questions? Let's see. Um, yeah, and also we have a Onix Nexus event coming up later this year. And we have the ONS event in Stavanger. That is a perfect site to learn more about this. We're going to have more information on the upcoming machinery regulation at that event. You can also talk to us directly on those two events. We're going to send out a little bit more information about this later on. And also, yeah, it was said here that we're going to send you a recording of this webinar, and also possibly a little bit more extra information for you that is coming down the line. I can't promise anything now, but yeah. So, Kjetil, if you like. There we go. Yeah, so if there was no other questions here, yeah, we're well within time. We used 40 minutes so far. I'm hoping, hope you got proper outcome out of, or proper value out of this, and we're gonna try to keep updating you guys on further changes coming down the line. Um, I'm just gonna have to um, push a little notification to you here about the norms and regulations that are in effect in Norway. Don't be afraid to look up regulations that are uh, valid for the equipment that you are using. There's a lot of valuable information there. Uh, in information about use and maintenance that is not posted in user manuals, for example. And also, please be more vigilant on pushing requirements to your suppliers and your manufacturers about documentations on work equipment. Sales to UK versus CE marking. I believe that the European Economic Association also is valid in Britain. So that means the CE marking should also be applicable there. And I believe there's a secondary marking coming down the line as well, a EN marking. I believe there's a transition coming here. If both are going to be applicable at the same time or not, I'm not sure. Yeah, but if you are not in UK and you're selling to UK, you still, as a supplier, have to be in compliance with the regulations within the EU if you are based within the EU. Uh, the same rules apply if I import something from China to Europe or import or sell something from Europe to China. If it's across the borders of the European Economic Association, then these rules apply. Yeah. So if there is no other questions coming up, then I'm going to just say thank you very much to everybody for showing up, and have a really, really nice day. And we'll send you a copy of this and a little bit more information coming down the line.